Welcome, everyone, to Final Forum, a podcast for the discussion of all things Dragon Ball. I am your host, Jelly, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host.
This is the beginning.
And if that intro sounded a little bit weird and a little bit lower energy to you, then you've probably guessed, no doubt from the episode title, what we're here for. And that is we are here to discuss the unfortunate recent passing of Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball. And to that end, we've actually invited a friend along with us, someone who I've known for the better part of 2 decades, actually, and who I know is a big fan of Dragon Ball and Akira Toriyama's work. And I wanted to get them on here just to give us some additional insight and be able to have this be a little more roundtable, a little bit more free form. You may know them as one of the members of the band Soul Mass or from their Twitch streams. But we have with us today a good friend of mine and hopefully a friend of the podcast, Lux Edwards.
Yes, I'm Lux Edwards. I am a friend of the podcast. I've been listening for the entirety of the podcast, and so I'm a big fan. I'm glad to be here to talk about Akira Toriyama, one of the seminal parts of the greater parts of my life, and one of the things that I love a lot.
And it's here that I have to apologize to our listeners and to my 2 co-hosts for this episode. I had an audio issue on my original portion of the recording. None of my audio on my side of it recorded for about the first 10 minutes. Luckily, that was actually just my introduction, really, to everything and my sort of laying out how I envisioned the episode would go. So I think I can recapture that, edit it all back together, and make it at least a salvageable listen. Because really the key core and the best part of our conversation happened once I got that audio issue fixed. And so I think I can just kind of recapture what I said to sort of set the stage, and then I can put it all Frankenstein back together and do this the way that I envisioned doing it when we initially recorded. So as I mentioned, we're here to discuss the unfortunate and untimely passing of Akira Toriyama, which came as quite a shock to pretty much all of us. And I think the statements that have been given by people like Masako Nozawa and Oda, who's the author of One Piece, as well as others in the community, such as Kishimoto and even Jackie Chan has spoken up, have all shown how sudden this was. He died on March 1st from acute subdural hematoma, and we all found out on, I believe it was March 7th, very late in the evening. I remember I was actually getting my kids ready for bed, and I pulled up my phone just to take a look at things and kind of flip through as they were brushing their teeth. And I saw a post on like a random Dragon Ball group because I decided that as a host of a Dragon Ball podcast, I should follow a bunch of Dragon Ball groups, and even though they don't really add anything to my life, and I saw the post saying that Toriyama had died, and I Googled it quickly and saw that it was not a hoax and it was actually fact. I'll be honest, at first I just felt kind of numb. I kind of didn't want to believe it. I felt like there's no way someone as young as him and who was still so active could pass away. But once it kind of settled in, and I think that's part of what this podcast is going to be, is it's us parsing this and processing it and coming to terms with it and admitting it and accepting it. But once I started to, I just thought, boy, this is an opportunity to talk a little bit about him and what he meant to us. And I don't want to talk about his life and his biography. We have actually done that before. If you want to check it out, it's one of our earlier episodes. I'm pretty sure it should be fairly easy to find in our feed. Just scroll back and look for one with Akira Toriyama in the title. And that's where we've talked about his life and how he came to create Dragon Ball, as well as the many other things that he created throughout the course of his career. And also, you could just listen to all of our other episodes, shameless self-plug there, but we're constantly talking about him and what we feel about him and what we think about him because we are talking about one of his works. But I wanted to focus more on what he meant to us and what his work meant to us, because I think that's a better celebration of his life and who he was than just recounting the facts of his upbringing. One very brief note to mention is that we found out on March 7th, and he had actually passed on March 1st. A lot of people have been very confused about this, about how it took so long for us to be able to find out about someone so important and monumental passing away. This is not at all uncommon for Japanese people specifically. I'm not sure about other cultures, but I know that Japan tends to be more private, especially with the passing of people. For example, the Godzilla composer Akira Ifukube, the cause of death has still never been revealed to the public. I remember just recently, a few years ago, Akira Takarada, the star of the original Godzilla movie, passed away, and we found out like 4 days later. So for us to not find out about the passing of a Japanese individual, even one who is extremely well known and very celebrity and very popular, and for it to happen in a sudden way, and all of the other things that are swirling around this, where people think you might have found out immediately if this was the United States, it's not at all surprising that it took us a week to find out. It's pretty common for the culture. I've actually recounted before on our podcast, actually, how I came to Dragon Ball, but just to reiterate, it was this weird thing where I turned on the TV and I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, the character's hair was a different color, and I sort of dismissed the show as being this thing that couldn't decide what its main character's hair color was, and that like misconception or that perception of the show actually persisted for kind of an embarrassingly long time. And that's probably in no small part because Toonami would frequently air the Cell Games stuff. And I know there's like a long stretch of that where Goku and Gohan have their Super Saiyan forms, but they're very calm and very relaxed. And they're just like their normal characters. And they're having conversations with people and talking to people. And then, in an episode right before that or maybe right after that, because Dragon Ball bounced, or at least I wasn't super paying close attention to the show at that time, so to me it just was bouncing kind of all over the place. They had black hair, and I was like, this show can't decide what color its character's hair is. What a weird little thing. And I just sort of stopped paying attention to it. It wasn't until I came back around to it years later, as it started to gain more and more popularity, that I realized what was going on. And that's sort of how I came to Dragon Ball. It's not the most flattering story for someone who runs a Dragon Ball podcast, but it's the truth. It's my experience coming to Dragon Ball. As for what Toriyama meant to me, and it's going to get tough to say meant and was about this man, but it's going to have to be something that happens. But as for what Toriyama meant to me, I used to run a different podcast, and we would talk during this podcast about movies. We would talk about every movie that came out that month that was actually coming out on either home video or in second run theaters. And the name of the podcast was the Second Run Podcast. And I enjoyed doing it, but it became a lot of work. And I got very burned out. I was watching more movies than I even wanted to. And a lot of the movies that I didn't even want to and knew I wasn't going to enjoy just for the sake of talking about on a podcast. And it was starting to wear me out because there wasn't the justification of getting paid to be doing this. So I shut that podcast down. I don't know if any of it even still exists out there anywhere on the internet. And that was it for me for podcasts for a while, but I always kind of wanted to come back to it. And I started to think over the years, what else do I like? What could I run a podcast about? And the idea of Godzilla came up and a Godzilla podcast, and, arguments could be made whether I am running a Godzilla podcast right now with how many references I tend to drop into every episode of Final Forum. But I kicked the idea around, I brought it to some friends, and ultimately we just couldn't see exactly eye to eye on the format and how I wanted the show to be structured and how they wanted it to be done. And we just kind of said, hey, you guys go do that because you're more the kaiju sort of experts, and I'll be on your show and I'll assist in any way that I can, but it's not my show anymore. And so then I started thinking, well, what else do I like and what else do I care about? And the idea of Dragon Ball actually came up in that sort of initial ideation pretty early. But I couldn't conceive of a world where I would have that much to say about Dragon Ball. And by pure happenstance, I started to do a little bit of research into what a Dragon Ball podcast could be and what it could look like. And I started to realize that there was a lot more to talk about than I was giving it all credit for. And so I reached out to the Bikini, who I've known for a long, long time. And I asked him to if he was interested, and he said yes. And we've been doing this for 3 years now, and it's in a lot of ways been a bit of an escape for me. It's been I tended to watch a lot of what I call like misery porn movies or misery dirges, where these are movies that are like designed to make you feel uncomfortable and make you feel just miserable, honestly. And that's because I watch so many movies. I've grown sort of numb to the cookie cutter entertainment. I don't find a whole lot of thrills in your typical big tentpole blockbuster type of movie anymore. And so I think if like a movie can make me feel anything, it's doing its job. It's making me feel something, and I kind of relish in that. And Dragon Ball has very often been the antidote to that for me. It's the opposite. And learning more about it has only deepened my appreciation for it and my appreciation for Toriyama. And the Bikini and I joke all the time about, what a lazy genius he is or whatever, but I genuinely have come to really appreciate everything that he did and how much of a genius he really was in crafting a lot of this. He knew what he was doing. He likes to downplay it a lot of times, but he knew he was creating a show for young boys. He knew he was creating something where the lore and the facts and the strict rules didn't matter as much as creating an entertaining product that stayed true to its characters. And he very smartly put his feet down at the right times to maintain what Dragon Ball always was. And I've only come to just appreciate all of that and everything that Toriyama did and everything that he was more by doing this podcast. And so for me, it's meant a reconnection to a friend of mine from college that I kind of lost touch with for a while and didn't talk to very regularly. And also a fun thing that I do get to do now a couple of times a month. I get to talk to a friend about one of my all-time favorite franchises, and we get to learn more about it and hopefully teach our listeners something about it. And if not, maybe we're just entertaining you. I don't know. Maybe we're not doing either and you hate listening. I guess I appreciate the listens either way, but I'm learning a lot. I'm learning so much more about this franchise and so much more about the culture that created it, the situations and the background behind what makes Dragon Ball Dragon Ball, and not even just the what, but why. Why did it turn out this way? Why did it become this why did it morph from this Journey to the West thing into this sci-fi action thing? And how did that happen along the way? And what drove Toriyama to incorporate all these elements? And that's only deepened my appreciation for all of it. And so at this point, I'm going to transition back over to the recording, the original recording, and I'm pretty sure I'm just going to kind of let it run from there. I'm going to do very little editing on this episode, aside from what I've done to salvage the beginning. And I think I need to butt in one other time. Lux's audio glitches out at one point, only for a few seconds. It's basically...
Yeah, I think that's actually a good segue, saying that it's not the only thing he's created. Because my personal first experience with Toriyama's work, not realizing it at the time until I was a Dragon Ball fan later on, from a very young age, I've always been playing video games. And some of my earliest memories going to my grandmother's house was playing video games with her on her Nintendo Entertainment System. And one of her favorite types of games was JRPGs. So she loved Final Fantasy. She also had SNES, so she also loved like the Final Fantasy games on there, and Chrono Trigger, and the Secret of Mana, that series. But mainly my first thing was playing her copy of Dragon Warrior, which is known as Dragon Quest over in Japan. And I really love that game, so much to the point that she just let me have her copy. So without realizing at the time, the aesthetics that Akira Toriyama's art put into Dragon Warrior had embedded themselves deep within me, and I really adored that game. It's still one of my favorite NES games, along with the original Final Fantasy, and my favorite game of all time. Well, one of my favorite game of all time on the SNES is Chrono Trigger, which again also art by Akira Toriyama. So later on, when I first encountered Dragon Ball Z, was like most other people in North America, when it started airing on Toonami. I had already been watching anime on Cartoon Network with its proto Toonami stuff, like when they were showing blocks of like Gatchaman and Sailor Moon and Robotech and all of that. And then Toonami came around, and then when they brought Dragon Ball Z on TV, it was like a cultural phenomenon. Suddenly everybody that you knew in school even was watching Dragon Ball Z, and we were all talking about it. And it was suddenly on all the shelves and all the stores, and the merchandise was everywhere. These are also the very early days of the internet as well. So as all of us were very young at that time, I think we're all around the same age range here. Those early days of the internet, going to websites and that were just like GeoCities and Tripod, that kind of Angel Fire sites, all these fan sites, not just in English, but you'd go around the web rings and you'd see them in all different languages, and suddenly you realize that you've stumbled on something that is an international phenomenon. Um, so yeah, like a lot of people in the US, when the Ocean dub was just like repeating before Funimation started doing their own dub. Yeah, watching the Saiyan and the Namek arcs over and over, I eventually just I bit the bullet, and I bought a whole bunch of fan sub VHSs for the rest of the series. And so while a lot of people really are latched onto the Ocean dub or the Funimation dub, and the specific different the soundtracks, the music with like Bruce Faulkner and stuff.
This is where Lux's audio cut out for a moment. They were just talking about how the Japanese version is their version, and when you kick back into the recording, you'll hear Masako Nozawa is Goku. It's them saying, to me, Masako Nozawa is Goku. Very little missed, in fact, but I just want to make it clear to everyone what happened here.
Goku is Masako Nozawa, and the cast is the Japanese cast. The music is the Japanese music, and that is peak nostalgia for that specific section of my life. Those years are Dragon Ball Z and the rest of the franchise, as I just voraciously seeking everything out I could, because I was just obsessed. And yeah, ever since then I've been obsessed. Even when it was going off of air, thanks to people like Team 4-Star doing Dragon Ball Z Abridged, and like you said, different people on different forums and websites and podcasts keeping it alive over the years, before Kai started up and Dragon Ball started having a resurgence more recently, relatively. Yeah, it's amazing how enduring this franchise is, and that's really culturally significant on a level that is equal to anything like Godzilla or Pokemon or Ultraman. All these things that are globally recognizable brands that came out of Japan, he's right up Toriyama is right up there with him with Dragon Ball Z and Goku. You can go to almost any country on the planet and say Goku, and boom, you're going to find somebody who knows what Dragon Ball is. So I think that's pretty cool, and that's very much deeply ingrained into who I am as a person, and what what I see in media when I watch it. Is I very much think about how he told his stories and his characters.
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I am like, I'm a unique person, I think, in my fandom, in that, like, I have my preferences for sure on, I generally watch the dub, and I generally prefer Falconer. I'll say it's not Falconer himself, though. It's the Falconer Productions team or whatever, right? But I don't super have like a preference, Sure, when I think of Goku and Vegeta, the voices I personally do hear are Sean Schemmel and Chris Sabat, but I also like Brian Drummond just as much, and I love Masako Nozawa as well. Like just like with Godzilla, where I don't have like like my perfect version of a lot of Godzilla movies is like some weird mix of the American and Japanese versions. My perfect version of Dragon Ball is some weird Frankenstein of all of it. Because it's so, each iteration has its own charm.
Absolutely.
And I think it's because of Toriyama's like creative input in creating this universe. I really do. I think what makes it so enduring and so easily like what makes it such a worldwide phenomenon and makes it to me not a big deal if you prefer the Japanese version or the English version or I'm sure like overseas people are big the Spanish dub and the isn't like the Portuguese dub supposed to be actually like for its language really good and the voice actors in Portuguese like really well known there.
I've heard a lot of praise for the Italian dub, um, and yes, the Spanish and Portuguese dubs.
And so what makes it so like adaptable to all of that is because what the core of Dragon Ball is this wonderful world that Akira Toriyama developed that is just so optimistic. And I, in a lot of my entertainment, do tend to skew towards misery dirges and uncomfortable things and stuff that makes me want to crawl out of my skin because I consume a lot of media and I watch a lot of movies in a given year. And I've become numb to a lot of the cookie cutter entertainment. And so if a movie can make me feel anything, I think it's doing a great job. And a lot of the movies that make me feel things these days are movies that make me feel like really uncomfortable. and so I do watch like a lot of movies that are like designed to make you like really uncomfortable. Dragon Ball is just like it's like the antidote for that. It is the exact opposite of that. It is optimistic, it is welcoming, it is all inclusive. It as much as, Toriyama being a fairly traditional Japanese man will allow him to be all inclusive. but it tries to be like that's the ideal and the standard that it strives towards, and it's like a very forgiving universe too. You can have committed some really big mistakes in your past, and as long as you want to be good and are open to the possibility of salvation, I guess, you can be. You're not stuck as who you think you are in the mistakes that you've made. That's why Vegeta speaks to me, I think, and probably so many people, is here's this character, and I think Piccolo too. This is why these are two of the more popular characters. These are characters that were seen as like irredeemable, the baddest of the bad, the most evil. Hell, at one point, even after you think Vegeta's maybe a good guy now, he kills hundreds of people just to get Goku to fight him. And they're not beyond saving, and they're not beyond becoming allies and heroes. And that's just such a Bikini, we've talked about this before. It's like Goku, because of who he is a lot like Superman. It's the what if someone with absolute power was also absolutely good?
Sure, yeah. Flying in the face of power corrupting, essentially.
And yes, Goku's not Superman. He is definitely a little more selfish, but but he's innocent and he's naive and he is optimistic and he is uplifting and inspiring, and that, I think, as long as you preserve that in Dragon Ball, you're preserving a lot of what Toriyama brought into it that makes it so appealing to people, and that's why it's so adaptable nationwide or internationally.
Sure, absolutely.
So I don't know, Bikini. Do you have anything in terms of your, coming to a Toriyama experience?
So my trajectory is pretty similar to Lux's, a slightly different starting point. I was first exposed to Toriyama through Chrono Trigger before I got to Dragon Quest, but essentially the same trajectory from there. Um, I remember when Dragon Ball Z first came out on Toonami because I was sort of aware of it before that, but I had never had the opportunity to actually see it because as a young person, I lived kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so there wasn't a lot of options for media consumption. Um, but once my parents finally got cable and I got the opportunity, I was like, okay, cool. Let me watch this show that I've heard about a little bit and see what all the hubbub's about. And on top of that, I am a comic book nerd. I've been reading comics since about fourth grade, mostly like Spider-Man and Marvel, but just a little bit of everything. And I think what struck me most when I was first exposed to Dragon Ball was traditionally in comics, like everyone's power sets and strength and things like that are usually pretty static, and they only vary depending on basically like the person that's writing them. But Dragon Ball was the first time I had encountered a character whose entire motivating force was just to be better than he was yesterday. And I think that's really what speaks to my fandom of the series, because that's a philosophy that I have incorporated personally. Every opportunity that I get, I want to try and be better than I was yesterday. And yeah, it was just such a new experience, and it really kind of hooked me on this character and on this universe, because the more you watch, the more you realize that philosophy that he has starts to spread to other characters, and you start to see how much good it can do when you're willing to work on yourself. And that really spoke to me personally. Yeah, but after Toonami, like Luck said, fan sites and stuff. I actually had a fan site. I went to GeoCities and I made a fan site. It was mostly just like really cool art that I found about the series, or stuff that I drew myself that I would just post up there for people to look at. And I probably only got like maybe a dozen people or whatever. I was in like 8th grade at the time. But yeah, no, the bug bit me hard, and I went full on into Dragon Ball when they started showing that on Toonami, and I was like, that really got me interested in other series that they started to introduce after that, like Yu Yu Hakusho. Naruto was a big one. Like once I'd finished high school and I'd started getting into that, which gateway into manga, which was a medium that I absolutely gravitated to, being a comic book nerd for most of my life. And then just it's one of those series that kind of sticks with you, but as you go through life, I kind of had let it sort of drop off and had stopped paying attention to it for a while. So that's why I haven't seen Super yet, or anything, or any of the more recent stuff, because it's one of those things where I was like, well, I'll get around to it eventually. But I never really took the time to do it until Jelly actually approached me about doing this podcast. He was like, hey, you're a fan of Dragon Ball. Do you want to do this podcast with me? And I was like, that would be a great excuse for me to catch up on all the Dragon Ball that I've missed.
In 8 years when we get to it.
Yeah. Yeah, but in light of Toriyama passing, I might cheat a little bit and start taking in the art that he's left for us. And I also think that's one of the really fortunate things about having this media to consume is there's not a whole lot of opportunity for the average Joe to sort of like leave a piece of themselves behind for people to interact with. But he definitely does. I mean, he's like we've been talking. He's all over video games. He's all over manga. He's all over anime. He's this is becoming, not even becoming. It's been a major source of media for, I mean, at least the past 20 years from my perspective as a Westerner. And I think it's as sad as it is for him to go, at the same time, it's also really awesome that I got to live through uh, all of the stuff that he has put out in that time frame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the I keep seeing a lot of, not a ton. I see like a decent mix of people who are posting more like, I don't know, like kind of uplifting or kind of cute tributes, um like everyone donating their energy to like a spirit bomb to like give, as, and it's like love for Toriyama, or the like the cute like endings of Dragon Ball that Toriyama had done over the years of like, thanks, we'll see you next time, and
Yeah.
and more heavy stuff of like Goku like crying over him having passed and stuff. And I tend to skew more towards the, I think he would want the less serious stuff.
Yeah. And I think that comes through in a lot of, like, because I like the one I sent you earlier today, where those little snippets in his comics where he's got his own little insert character and he puts him in little silly situations and things like that.
Yeah.
It really does feel like those are the kinds of things that he would appreciate.
And I think, if you're listening to this and you want to know more about like why we think this way, I mean, go back and listen to the rest of our episodes. Shameless plug. But especially our episode where we talk about Toriyama himself. He is that one, and we just did one. What was it might not even be out yet, Bikini. The one that we just did where we talked about the love angles coming up in the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai.
Oh, yeah.
And
How he hated them.
he himself said he doesn't like being serious, and he doesn't like serious stories, and he doesn't like love angles, and he had to be pushed by Torishima to even start making like serious villains like Piccolo and Vegeta and Frieza, and I just think his personality would be one of like, don't like weep over it, don't cry over it, don't despair, like I'll see you next time, like
Yeah.
there's more to come. My creation's not over, Dragon Ball's not over, the influence that I've left is not over. It's all still there. This is just bye for now kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's where I do, just very briefly, I don't want to get too deep into this because this is like a different discussion almost, of like, Dragon Ball will continue. Dragon Ball Super has been being written by Toyotaru for a long time, and Toriyama's been actually getting more and more hands off with the manga over the years. He's been focusing more on like kind of like one-off projects, like the movies, where it's almost like you can build a Toriyama continuity through these movies. Going back to Battle of Gods, where he rewrote most of that script. Resurrection F, where he wrote, I think, the whole script. I can't remember on Broly how much of that he wrote. And then Superhero, he like wrote the entire movie also. Into Daima, where he's written most of it, is my understanding as well. It seemed like that was more his focus, was like, yeah, I do still want to play in the sandbox, but
It almost feels in a way like he was trying to get back to the feel of original Dragon Ball, where it's a bit more silly and upbeat and positive, I guess.
Yeah, and I think he was trying to, like, he still wanted to play in the sandbox, and I still think he probably had several other projects he wanted to do, and that's a big piece. It's another big piece of why it is so tragic that he passed away so young. I think he still wanted to create and still wanted to tell stories in this universe, but Dragon Ball will keep going. My only concern really is I just hope that Toyotaru has come into his own enough and is strong-willed enough, and that whoever ends up being assigned to future Dragon Ball projects is respectful enough of Toriyama and what Toriyama's sort of vision overall would have been to not change those couple of big things that I think make Dragon Ball, and that is like beginning, like you mentioned, the constant like increase, like not don't be static, grow the world, grow the universe, grow the characters. Even if Goku is still the same person all the time because he's got that flat character arc, grow his strength, grow his understanding of the world, and don't get static with it. Don't just like do the same thing all the time. Be positive, be optimistic. Don't have go like we'll talk about GT when we get to GT, but its big failing is, I think, that it loses sight of sort of that optimism of Dragon Ball, of like it dips too much into Goku just killing the villains because it's a badass thing to do, and it loses sight of him actively trying not to kill villains. And spoilies, I guess, for the podcast, I actually have read Super. Like, I'm caught up in Super because my son has gotten super into it and wanted to keep reading, and I'm not going to deny my 8-year-old some joy just to surprise myself later on for a podcast. So even today, with what Toyotaru is doing in Super, he still has Goku like throughout the granola arc. Multiple times, Goku is like, "Come on, let's just stop fighting. This is like a big misunderstanding. We don't need to be fighting. Let's find a different solution. I don't want to hurt you. If you want to fight and you want to spar, awesome. Let's do that. But I don't want to like. This doesn't need to be a fight to the death." And like, don't lose sight of that piece of it. The Goku trying to not kill the villains. Don't lose sight of the growth piece of it. And don't lose sight of, and this is another thing where, despite how much I actually do like the ending of Dragon Ball GT, and I think it is a good ending, I do think it also loses sight of what makes a Toriyama work unique, and that is that there is no ending in a Toriyama story. It's always until the next adventure, until the next time, until we meet again, because it's that very Eastern kind of Buddhist mentality of the adventure keeps going, everything keeps going, you're always getting better, you're always performing your shugyo, and you're always improving, and that's what I hope that if Super eventually, well, it'll eventually end and everything, but I hope when it does, it just keeps they keep sight of that. This isn't the end. This is like, see you later.
I agree. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think. But at the same time, I think I have a lot of faith in Toyotaro. Because like we talked about, all of us were gravitating to all those fan sites and everything in the early days of Dragon Ball, and I'm sure all of us originally saw all of his fan art on all of those websites as Dragon Ball AF when he was just very young.
Mm-hmm.
And we all thought that might be something real. And lo and behold, eventually he took the reins of the franchise itself. I think he has his heart in the right place. I think he is essentially one of us, quotes. I think Toyotaro is going to keep it alive. For how long, we don't know. But having seen what he's done with Super, I'm pretty happy with what the future holds for the franchise. I think he will keep the spirit of Toriyama's characters in Dragon Ball alive. For whatever comes after Toyotaro, we can't speak to yet, but I am definitely looking forward to Daima.
I am too.
Yeah, I think, and I think that I think we'll also be pretty lucky on any other projects that sprout out of Dragon Ball going forward, because like you're saying, there's so many fans. That's kind of the benefit of this being such a hugely popular franchise, is there are so many fans out there that are talented and would absolutely do those projects justice.
Yeah, I think it's fair to be concerned though, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on that, but I mean, Lux, you're a Godzilla fan. You have seen the Godzilla franchise devolve essentially into being at times the exact opposite of what the franchise started as. And I don't mean just the fact that it started as serious and became kiddie. I mean that Godzilla, even in those kiddie ones that were from the 60s, was always very humanist, very anti-politics, very anti-nuke, very anti-military buildup. I know that the military often fights Godzilla, but it wasn't like rah rah go military type of stuff. It was very like humanist and very as much as it could be pacifist. And we have seen it go the exact opposite direction of having the DoD essentially directing Godzilla movies, of having it be an extremely political thing. And I think it's fair to be worried that without Toriyama there, that there's the potential to start sliding away from what Dragon Ball is.
I think that worry is founded too, because like you said, a lot of what kept Dragon Ball on course was Toriyama. Because as you've covered over the years so far, even early on, there were always executives trying to tell him what to do, and he would find a middle road. It's going to be up to Toyotaro now to find that middle road.
Right. And even other things, like even the recent stuff, we'll get more into it again when we get there, but like Battle of Gods was originally going to be, Beerus was going to be, and I don't know that he was called Beerus at this time, but he was going to be like an evil lizard who like was actively evil, instead of just this sort of like kitty cat destroy, like he is, Beerus is absolutely like a kitty cat who has unlimited power. Like that's what he is. And that is so much more Toriyama than giant evil villain who's this like unrepentant, unsalvageable type of, and you know, there was a lot of more serious stuff in the original Battle of Gods script that they gave it to Toriyama and said, "Hey, we'd like some of your notes." And he was like, "Yeah, I'm just going to rewrite this." So, you know, and I think that's a valid worry and concern, but I still think I'm also on the board of like, you can't ever undo what someone has done. And what this guy has done over the course of his 50-ish year career, which it wasn't quite 50. Dr. Slump was first published in 1980. He had a couple that were published before that. But you know, and then he was publishing and doing projects still in 2024. So I think he was about 46 years, something like that, of being active. You can't take any of that away. And you can't, just because someone might come along that does a Dragon Ball thing that is potentially very bad, it doesn't eliminate what came before. And Toriyama's legacy, I think, is set, and I think what that legacy is I'll go on, like, you can make all these arguments about who the best mangaka of all time is, and who the most popular is, and who which series is the most popular, which character is which one's the best written, all those things. What I really think Toriyama is, that I'm not sure you can argue with, is the most important mangaka for the popularity of manga and anime internationally of all time.
Hard agree. I think if not for Toriyama's specific style and how he revolutionized basically how young boys shonen manga was written and presented with how his paneling worked and how he wrote characters and all of it. It was so incredibly influential that you can't read anything made since then without seeing those influences. So you cannot quantify it at this point. He is uh, the person who created what we know as today's shonen manga.
Yeah, and yes, we've talked a lot in our episodes about how other people have done a lot of the legwork in pimping Dragon Ball out, right? Chiaki Imada wanted to have this be he wanted to market like Toei products the same way that Disney marketed their products, and he wanted to grow the brand internationally and have it compete with Disney, and Torishima also wanted to keep pushing Toriyama to be bigger and think bigger, but none of that exists without Toriyama behind it in the first place, creating this stuff that people are looking at and going, this could be an international phenomenon. And that really is, I think, Toriyama's lasting legacy is if you like manga, you can thank Akira Toriyama because your Demon Slayer, your Jujutsu Kaisen, your My Hero Academia, your Naruto, sorry, your One Piece, and even stuff like that precedes Dragon Ball, your Doraemons and Astro Boys and things like that. Those wouldn't be seen as viable commercial products here in America without Toriyama creating Dragon Ball and having that become a massive international phenomenon.
To go back to what we were talking about a little bit ago about worries for the future of the franchise. I think it's interesting that you bring up legacy, because the way I've been kind of looking at it is, and this is actually kind of interesting because we're sort of at this point in Dragon Ball where the students have far surpassed the master. And I'm not implying that like anybody has surpassed Toriyama, but like it's that narrative moment where like Roshi decides like, oh, these kids have surpassed me. It is their time now. That's kind of how I see this now. It's unfortunate that he has passed, but Dragon Ball, I think, has become something so large now that it's while you can't take away what he has done at this point, I think you have to make a distinction between what he has done and now what is going to be doing going forward, because now it's the next generation that's going to pick up those reins and run with it, and we kind of have to just wait and see what they're going to do.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
I think we've really been blessed, to be honest, with what we've gotten since he came back to the franchise, because he already handed off the reins before. He was done with Dragon Ball, and then we got, Dragon Ball GT, but we're not even thinking about that. If we're talking about handing off the reins to a new generation, the immediate followers, which we've already named a couple of them, were One Piece and Naruto and Bleach, the new big three that came after. If not for those, they kept Shonen and Weekly Shonen Jump alive after Dragon Ball ended, and until Super came back with the movie and with the new manga. Again, there's just been constant iterations on even those three have had their followers. So like you said, Tom, it's now in the hands of new people, and like Kenny said, um, it's up to this new generation, very much like Roshi handing off the reins at the Budokai to Goku and Krillin and Tin Shinhan. It's stepping away and letting the next generation take over the reins. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
And we only had to suffer through Dragon Ball Evolution to get him to come back. So
That's though I don't want to get too deep down that. I mean, we've already gotten deeper almost than I wanted to, but I do slightly fear a potential future where you look back at Dragon Ball Evolution the way that I sometimes look back at the 98 Godzilla film, where I think, boy, that movie at least got the nuclear message way more right than like King of the Monsters did. And I don't I hope that I can 30 years from now still look back at Evolution as the nadir of the franchise and not think, boy, that at least understood that it's supposed to be kind of silly, and that at least understood that Goku is supposed to be like an optimistic and uplifting character. And that we don't like just skew so far off the path.
I mean, there's still things that are currently being released in the franchise that have skewed pretty far from the path. So,
well, is that like that Super Dragon Ball Heroes?
Yeah, you knew exactly what I was talking about.
I don't pay attention to that.
We're always going to get stuff like that though, because I mean, we even have a lot of the same sort of fan service essentially in like the video games and the Xenoverse games and all the other stuff and in those web series. And I don't think any of that's going to end anytime soon. So there's always going to be the fans for those who are just looking for the fights and the cool transformations and the flashy stuff. And we're going to pray that we'll always have Toyotaro and others like him to balance that out on the other side of the franchise.
Yeah, I would agree. And then also just as like a final kind of wrap up thought here in a way is, if you've been listening to us, I absolutely appreciate it. I love it. I would like to get more of you, hopefully someday.
I second those notions.
And don't just stop at Dragon Ball. And listen, if you're on this ride with us and you've been like enjoying learning more about Dragon Ball, that's awesome. I think that's great. That's like the whole reason why I wanted to do this was I want to learn about this stuff, and it has only deepened my appreciation for it. And I hope it's done the same for our listeners as well, and that they also are learning and listening and everything along the way. But don't just stop at Dragon Ball. I picked up Akira Toriyama's manga theater, the Viz version of it, and yes, there's some stuff in there that's kind of rough because it's got the Wonder Island and tomato, the cutesy tomato gumshoe or whatever she's called, and there's some stuff that's just like, it's frankly not well written and not super well drawn either. But there's also some really good stuff in there, and Toriyama didn't just begin and end with Dragon Ball. Frankly, he was popular before Dragon Ball. Dr. Slump was a massive national Japanese phenomenon. There's Dr. Slump, which I haven't experienced yet. I would hope to someday. There's his Toriyama's manga theater, which has a couple of things in it, like it has Cashman, which is like a slightly longer one, and Chobit, which I think was 2 instead of just 1. There's also Go-Go Akman, which is another one that had like multiple issues. Neko Majin, which is like a Dragon Ball Z parody written by Akira Toriyama, where like, I don't know a ton about it, but I think it's like all the characters are cats basically. There's Sandland, which I think Bikini and I will get to someday. There's Jocko the Galactic Patrolman, which I know we will get to someday. There's the Dragon Quest franchise. There's which one of those was directed by Takashi Yamazaki, our boy from Godzilla Minus One, and like the movie version was directed by him. And so there's there's so much more just within Toriyama. Don't don't just limit yourself to Dragon Ball, despite it being his most famous work, his most popular work, the one that we talk about most often. Um, there's so much that he's created, and so there's I think there's still a whole world and a whole universe and several universes to explore beyond just Dragon Ball, just with Toriyama. But so yes, we're saddened to hear of his passing. Hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully, this just helped. I don't know. Maybe process it. Maybe get your feelings straight on it. That's kind of what I was going for. I just wanted to kind of get my thoughts out there about this guy and this world that he created and kind of what it means to me. And I don't know if I got into what it means to me, but it is a I did a little bit, I think. It's an escape for me, and it's a positive escape, and it's an optimistic world, and it's like it's kind of what in some ways I think it was for Toriyama himself. His natural personality is one of more social anxiety and discomfort with crowds and maybe a little bit more pessimistic at times. And he created this world that is just the opposite of that. It is bright and colorful and enthusiastic and extroverted, and it can be so fun if you are like a little bit more introverted and have some of those social anxieties and things, to come to this world that is just so open and bright and colorful. And I've absolutely loved doing this podcast, and it's like a much needed, like, I
It's a
don't
nice
know.
break every once in a while to just
Yes.
get away and just be like a kid again for a while.
Yes. And it's his work has just like been awesome, and I love it, and yeah, I just I hope, and now I'm reading it with my 8-year-old son, and he loves it too, and it's so fun seeing someone hit the humor the way it was intended. I laugh at a lot of the stuff because it's like so groan inducing. My 8-year-old laughs at it because he thinks it's hilarious. And
I
so it
don't
is
know.
just
I watched today as my form of celebration instead of mourning. I decided to watch Dragon Ball Super Superhero, and that movie is nothing but fun and jokes, and it's a celebration of how unserious Toriyama can be instead of all that other stuff. And I love that movie so much. So I definitely get that feeling, and I found myself crying more so tears of joy while watching that movie. And I feel like that's something that will continue to stay with me going forward, even though he's no longer with us.
Yeah. I think a lot of my sentiments echo Jelly's. The man was a generational talent. That spans more than just Dragon Ball, and I'm the same way. Like, go out there, experience everything that he ever put out there, and really just revel in it and enjoy it, because that's why he did it. At the end of the day, he wanted people to look at it and experience it and enjoy it, and I think that's the best way to celebrate him.
yeah, and there's definitely times where we have said, I think if he listened to our podcast, sometimes he'd just roll his eyes
Be like, who are these people?
and be like, yeah, no, that's not what I meant. I just thought it'd be funny.
Yeah. The door is red. Yeah.
It's like, why do they read so much into everything?
And I think I've tried, and I would encourage everyone else to. Like I said, the tributes that I find myself identifying more with are the ones that are like, hey, come on, let's go on another adventure. You know, like there's there's a pretty good one where he's just like the Tory bot is just sitting at his desk drawing something, and all of a sudden the halo just appears over his head, and then he just keeps drawing anyways.
That is a pretty good one, actually.
I identify more with that, and I personally, and I'm not. Listen, if you're taking it hard and you're taking it emotionally, I don't want to take that away from you at all. Experience the grief of it however you want. I do personally think he would want everyone to look at his stuff and get a laugh out of it, and look at his life and find the joy, and like Lux mentioned, watch something to celebrate his life and celebrate his art, not to feel depressed about. I don't know if either one of you has anything else to add here.
No, I think that sums it up pretty nicely, actually.
Yes, I do want to just say before we wrap up, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and
I wish it was
try
under
to get
better
on.
circumstances.
We'll make sure we
next
get you
time.
on for something better in the future, for sure. Or, you know, better circumstances, more fun in the future. But yes, thank you for joining us. And I'm just going to sign off here. I'm not going to do the usual questions and such. I'll just say we'll take our leave of you here, and we will catch everyone next time. And rest in peace, Toriyama.
See you next time, everyone.